Thank you for the. Oh, now I think everyone knows it's being recorded. Awesome. So I'm going to share my screen real quick so everyone can look at all the pretty colors. Um, awesome. So with that, I'm going to kick it off. I talk fast. I have a lot of information here. I get really excited about this. So I tend to just fly through these presentations. So if there's questions, stop me. I have the chat open. So if something comes up, please feel free to say it, or you're welcome to wait till the end. I'm cool to fly either way. So with that, let's start and let's talk about data storytelling and why it's important. So when preparing for this presentation, I looked up 15 sources. Why 15? Because I like the number 15. It's my favorite number. It has always been my favorite number, and it will continue to be my favorite number. And that's why I looked up 15 sources. And other things you need to know about me. My name is Angelika. I have a master's in social work. I currently run a data analytics department for an international events and media company. We do about 30 shows globally. Some of these shows are the largest and the oldest running in their industry. And I'm currently reading Bad Feminist, which I highly recommend. Cool. Let's keep going. There's me. Hey. So in 11 out of the 15 articles that I read, they stated that data storytelling is important because data analysts, researchers are brilliant and very smart, and they need data storytelling to explain a concept to the caveman executives that they work with. This is a concept I have so many problems with. First off, it assumes that the data analyst and the researchers are made to be put on a pedestal. They're made to be put in a corner. They're made to work in silos. They don't encourage the collaboration that I think is so important to make some of this work so meaningful. So I love the example of Spotify Wrapped. So the Spotify Wraps, I'm hoping everyone looks forward to them or knows someone in your life who looks forward to these, where you get a personalized annual report at the end of the year that tells you about how much music you've listened to, what artists you've listened to, what countries they've come from. Many of the articles touted Spotify Wrapped as one of the best showcases of data storytelling. And I believe it's because they leveraged the three main components of data storytelling and then sprinkled in some stuff that just makes it a little special. So let's talk about data storytelling and how you do it. So data storytelling really is made up of three components. It's the data, it's the visuals, and it's the narrative. And we'll talk about those specifically as we get to each one of them. But a couple of the articles did mention a couple of other stuff, so we'll talk about that at the end. But for right now, all you need to know is why and how. So we're going to talk about audience because in my mind, a lot of the work that I do and that I know people do for data storytelling comes down to two main audiences. It's your executives, your key stakeholders, your senior leaders, or your customers or your potential customers. And for each of these, you have to get them bought in on the idea first. So let's talk about the maybe easier one first, which is your customers and your potential clients. So this I'm going to use with a case study. One of my team members was approached by a marketing department saying that they would like to send out an email to potential customers that says, if you join now, you could get X amount more views on your webpage by hosting on our webpage because this is how much web views we get. That's a lot. And there's a lot there. What I find really helpful when talking to customers and preparing for a data storytelling meeting is to have over the top amount of information ready, but also have a recommendation ready. We'll talk a little bit more about recommendations. So what my employee did was she gathered up all of this data because she said that, you know, they're featured on this web page, but they would also be featured on that web page or this web page. So she looked at the data for 3 different web pages. And then it was going to be different based on day and time. So if we looked at website views based on day differences from one year to the next, the number was going to be different versus looking at it month to month versus looking at it by quarter or even by year. And so, depending on which one you choose, your story changes and the way that you craft that marketing message to that customer changes. So, I knew and she knew that if she were to present all of this data to the marketing team and say, here's all your numbers, pick one and roll with it, they would have no idea where to start. So she made a recommendation. She said, I think you should use this web page and do it by month. Here's why. So for data storytelling, before getting into a presentation with potential customers, clients, have all the data ready and then be ready to narrow it down. Okay. So now let's talk about these cave people. So executives and senior leaderships, I do not believe them to be cavemen. I do believe that they're busy though. I believe that sometimes it's hard to get their attention. And so you need something to get their attention before you even start showcasing anything else. So when preparing for these, I think it's important to figure out what's your start strategy. How do you actually start these presentations? When I was a kid, my parents used to host a lot of parties. And I always felt my obligation to pull together a song and dance ensemble that I would present during these parties. Well, I would get downstairs and I would stand in front of a wall and I would wait quietly for every single person in the room to look at me. It was effective. It worked. Eventually, everyone got awkward enough that they just looked at me and tried to figure out what I was doing there. Then once everyone was quiet and looking at me, I knew that I was able to start. And I did. I use the same method when it comes to my presentations with executives. I will often enter into a room. I will quietly listen to the conversations that they are wrapping up. I will watch them as they type out their last emails. And I'll just wait. I've had a couple of executives say, are you leading this thing or what? I swear it's effective though, because eventually they all stop what they're doing and they look at me and they're ready for me to begin. This method might not work for everyone because not everyone can sit in comfortable or uncomfortable silence for that long. So there's other methods. I had a supervisor who had a very self-deprecating humor and had a very, very interesting life circumstances. And so when I was in meetings with him, it would not be uncommon for him to start a one-liner saying something like, this morning while I was grabbing my coffee, I looked down at my feet and I had 2 different socks on, a long sock and a short sock. How the heck did I do that? Or he would say something like, I'm so sorry, my flight got delayed this morning. I just ran in. Did you know flights could get delayed by clouds? After those one-liners, he would always follow it up with, okay, you all ready to get started? And it worked because everyone would be looking at him. He would have everyone's attention and we would continue on. It's important to know how you're going to start these meetings to get everyone's attention and get them ready. I don't recommend yelling, but hey, maybe it works for some people. So once you have their attention, it's important what you do next because you want to keep that attention and you want them to focus on what you're about to show them because it's so important and they need to see it, but they're busy and there's a lot going on. So I always recommend an executive summary. Executive summaries look very different depending on where you look at them. There's a million examples of them online. My favorites are always bullet points. It's a handful of bullet points on a slide that showcase the most important things you're going to be covering in that presentation. Now be aware, it is not uncommon for executives to say, hey, point 2, can we talk about that first? I think that's wrong. And if it doesn't mess up the flow of your presentation, go ahead and show them point 2 first. If it does, feel free to say, how about let's start with number 1 because I think it'll feed into number 2 and it'll be important to continue the conversation. Whatever the method you want to use, an executive summary ensures that what they're going to see is going to be interesting to them and something that they're going to be able to use. So now that I've hopefully gotten your attention and you're all focusing, we can now talk about the components of data storytelling, which starts with something that I consider most important, the data. Data is important, but data is overwhelming. Some companies have a ton of it. Some companies don't have enough of it. And so it often helps to have someone who's working in the data day in and day out to assist you if you're not one of the people that works in the data day to day. So what do you ask them? Well, you typically tell them, I have this hunch. I have this theory, this hypothesis. I'm kind of curious about X. They can take you the rest of the way. So let's talk about two examples. The first one is a new hire. You think, I'm pretty sure I need a new hire. I have a feeling that people have this often, and they often know when they need a new hire. But how do you showcase it? How do you use data to show this? This one's pretty easy. You look at the work you're completing currently, and then you look at the potential work you could be completing with an additional set of hands. Now you can look at this a couple of different ways. You can look at it in terms of number of projects. You can look at this in terms of time spent or dollars, either dollars earned or dollars saved. Kind of depends on what the data is. But when you look at it that way, you're now looking at data in a number of different ways. Because remember, with my potential customer, you are now the data person's customer. And so they're going to want to give you as much information as possible for you to be able to write a complete data story. Now, I do want to say at this point in time that data is highly manipulable and it's subjective. And so you have to be careful, because as you dive into this data about a new hire, you might actually learn that it's not a new hire that you need. It's actually training for an employee that happens to be falling behind or happens to not be completing as much work as other employees. And so I always want to give the disclaimer of don't make the data fit just because you want it to fit. Sometimes it doesn't, and that's okay. We're going to keep making sure that the data is accurate and that you're telling a story that is true to the data. Let's talk about another example. This one's a little bit more complicated, potentially, but it's also a really common one, an ineffective process. So you have something that is just not working. You're not really sure why it's not working, or maybe you do, you have a hunch of why it's not working, but you need to showcase why it's not working and what it's doing to everyone. So you map out the current process and then you add the numbers. What does this look like for time spent? What does this look like for resources? And resources include both people and dollars. Time can also be considered as a resource. Then you map out a new process. Again, add the time, add the resources, and find the difference. Is the new process faster than the old one? Does it save people time? Does it save people money? Does it eliminate a tool that's unnecessary for whatever reason? Executives really like to know that you've saved dollars, but be careful because they're going to know when the math is wrong. So triple check the numbers, make sure you're on point, and be prepared to show your homework. So how did you get that time data? How did you get that resources data? How did you assume that this new process is actually going to do all of that? Those questions will come up, and someone who works in the data can definitely help you answer them. Data is important. I hope I sold you on that. Visualizations. So this one is super fun and really, really important to get designers involved. I love visualizations. I love colors, and I will create things that I believe are so beautiful. And then I have a designer redo it and I realize how ugly mine was. And that is okay because I know my skills and I know my weaknesses. So visualizations are really the part that makes the data come to life. I could really go on and on about visualizations, but I think everyone understands the power of a good visualization. If not, let's show you a couple of examples. So all of these visualizations are from a website called Information is Beautiful that was shared with me by a graphic designer. I love this website purely because it has a number of infographics that do just this. It showcases the data in a way that's meaningful, powerful, and sometimes just kind of silly. But this is a good way to show numbers very clearly. It tells a very quick story with the numbers, and you can see them as you're supposed to see them. There's other ones that are more minimalistic, and it shows the same visual kind of over and over again as you see with the sun, but it can definitely show a very quick picture on the differences in time by seasons. And then, of course, you have ones that have very few words and numbers, but are still pretty effective at getting the point across. Visualizations are important. It's very easy to make a bad visualization. It's very easy to make a good visualization and then make it better. So work on visualizations. This is something that I find takes so much practice, and it constantly changes because there's visualizations that come out. There's different color schemes that you can use. There's different data you can add to it. So visualizations is cool and interesting and something that really can add power to your data. But we're missing a component, the narrative. So you have the data, and then you've created this beautiful visualization around it. But that's nothing. It's nothing without the narrative. The narrative is really what brings that all to life and gives it purpose. So we can look at these infographics, but what do I do with this? This is neat and this is interesting, but I have no actionable items from this. I don't know what to do next. I don't know how to proceed. That's where the narrative comes in. So the narrative tells you why you should care, why you should focus on this, why you should look at this more. So if we have any writers in this room, this is where your strength comes to shine. So the analysts can pull all the data, the designers can make a beautiful piece of art, and the writers are what come up with that narrative piece. Narratives can also come in different forms. So oftentimes when showcasing something, you really might only have 15 minutes. And so I say that this is a 15-minute presentation layout, but it can really be used for any length of time. You just add more to each section as you have more time to do it. And so let's say you really only have 15 minutes to present. Well, then what you can do is you start with the problem to be solved. Why is everyone here? Why are we talking about this? Then you add the data. Make sure there's no questions or confusions about the data and how you're using it. Make sure it's solving the problem that's meant to be solved. And then your recommendations on the last slide. So what do we do about it now? Here's my problem. Here's my data. Here's how I think we should solve it. New hire. Here's the work that we're able to do right now. Here's the amount of work we're having fall through the cracks or we're not able to get to. Here's the time, here's the resources, here's the teams we can't support, and then recommendations. I think the recording's going to be posted somewhere. Cal, can you help with where that recording's going to be?
Yeah, the recording will be on our YouTube channel. So I can repost our link tree here and you guys can find that. It'll be up within a few days, usually after the event. So I'll just go ahead and grab that link and post it one more time in the chat.
Thank you.
Yeah, no problem.
Awesome. So if you end up having 30 minutes to do a presentation, you can spend more time on the problem. You can spend more time on the data or spend more time on the recommendations. Really the spot that is needed to really bring home that story, that's where it's going to be impactful to spend that time. So let's talk about something else that is not completely mentioned in the research, but something that I think is really important. And that is going to be, making sure I can click on it, tone. So there's a number of different ways you can define tone. I typically like to come into a presentation with a tone in mind. Typically, it's professional and positive or enthusiastic and clear, but I definitely like to come into it with some kind of messaging that I'm trying to get across, a feeling that I'm trying to get across. There's some people that really like direct and logical. There's some people that like funny and non-serious. It doesn't matter how you define it. You don't need two words. Maybe you just use one, but keeping the tone consistent throughout the entire presentation makes people feel better. And so if people feel better, I don't have to get into the parts of the brain that are activated when your emotions are engaged. But there is a lot of science behind if your emotions are engaged, you're more likely to remember something. You're more likely to think about it and act on it, right? And so if you end up coming into a presentation and you start out making a joke and then you get really serious and then you go back to laughing, might make people feel a little uncomfortable and they're not really sure what to do. And that's not something you want to do. You want to ensure that people know how to approach you, how to engage, and how to be part of the conversation that you're laying out. Okay. So I talked about the three main components, which is data, visualizations, and narrative. A couple of the other articles mentioned three other pieces. I talked about audience. So we mentioned audience at the beginning of this presentation as two primary audiences. And so we talked about our potential clients and we've talked about our executives. Audience is important because you need to know who you're presenting to and how to showcase that data. Are you presenting to someone who's never seen this information before? Are you presenting to someone who really kind of has a good idea of what they're going to see? Are you presenting to someone very informally on a team level? Are you presenting someone who is at the C-suite level? Knowing your audience, knowing who's going to be there, who could potentially be there is really, really helpful for you to know as a presenter and also helpful to make that presentation more impactful. The second one is context. So context is related to audience because you want to know, are you having this conversation for the 15th time or are you having this conversation for the first time? Is this something that individuals know is a problem to be solved or are you presenting it for the first time? Context and audience, in my mind, go pretty closely hand in hand. And so certain articles mentioned that they were important to know before getting into the data storytelling. And then last one is delivery. How are you presenting the information? Most commonly, you'll see a PowerPoint with a number of slides that come up. But if this is something that the person already knows about, it's a conversation that's been had multiple times, an email could potentially be the best way to do it. An email with a starting problem to be solved, a couple of charts in there, and then an ending recommendation could do just exactly what a PowerPoint could do in a shorter amount of time. So with that, like I said, I talk fast, so I've rushed through this. I just have my question slide. I do have all of the references on these slides, so I can share these with everyone to take a look at the references that I looked at. But with that, I'll turn it over for questions. I think I'm a little early for questions, but that's okay. I think it's better than me rambling.
No problem. Wonderful. And thank you so much for the very, again, practice what you preach. Loved seeing the way you built engagement, kind of worked through, and then I love it even all the way through the end, the references, very well supported presentation on presenting presentations. So always love the meta stuff.
Thank you.
While people are thinking of anything they want to add into the chat here, I'd love to, excuse me, to lead off. Do you have any, maybe examples, memorable moments that come to mind where this kind of approach and this kind of presentation maybe helped sway somebody who is a bit indecisive, or helped to bring around a board vision to, your point of view and your line of thinking?
Yeah, definitely. I'll say that I've been very successful in building out teams. So this type of approach has gone very well with being able to hire new individuals, build out new teams, build out new processes. I ineffective processes, it works very well to really showcase where the hiccups are, because oftentimes I find that they're in silos. I find that people aren't even sure what's not working. All they know is that it's not working and they're not really sure why or what's taking so long. And so doing this type of presentation where you're really showcasing where the hiccups are for each potential team or person that's involved is a really easy way to bring about change, because you're having those conversations with the people either directly impacted or secondarily impacted.
Wonderfully said. Thank you so much.
Of course.
Another one I'd love to bring up, and apologies, this was right around where I had to step away, so you may have addressed this. But you mentioned a lot of times you're kind of doing the work, doing some of the recommendations, and then handing things off for other designers to come in and kind of take the lead and take things on. Do you find yourself, do you have a regular team that you collaborate with, or do you kind of vary from project to project on who you're working with and what their backgrounds are when you're trying to give these kinds of presentations and recommendations?
Yeah, that's a great question. I no longer have designers that I work with in my current role, which is quite sad. They are very busy doing other stuff. So I'm sure if I asked, I would be able to get a designer. Right now, what I have is when I work with designers, they're very good at pulling together templates. And so I'll say, hey, we typically do a presentation with a lot of bar charts and line graphs. And so could you potentially give us a color scheme that you think would work for this specific team on this topic? And so they'll send that over and we will be able to leverage that, what their educational backgrounds are. And I have no idea, because that is definitely not my background. All I know is that they're brilliant and the way that they view images and colors is just amazing. And so I just trust them to do exactly what I need them to do. I will say it's really, really helpful to get input from individuals who are not in the data day to day, because they can ask really powerful questions that I take for granted. And so I find that to be really helpful.
Fantastic. Thank you. And that actually led me right into a follow-up question. But I'll switch over to Paul in the chat. Thinking about qualitative research reports, would you discourage including a section in a presentation around the methods used? Paul finds that when he's working on this, his researchers seem to find that disclosing the exact methods is very, very important when putting a report deck together, but they are the bane of his existence. And really wondering, do you think this is something that should be included up front or have it ready if it's asked?
Paul, I feel like you already know me. Yes, it is definitely something I put in the appendix. Um, and again, I think it's one of those things that potentially it depends on the audience. If there's definitely meetings I've gone to where I know the audience is going to be real. I'm presenting to other researchers. I'm presenting to other data individuals. Yes, they are going to want to know what methods I use to ensure that they are valid and that they don't have any questions about it. So I work with other survey teams, and so we geek out about methods through and through. And so that is a team I'm going to showcase that right up front, because they're going to be interested in it. It's going to make an impact on how they view the rest of the presentation. Other individuals that are not so well versed or just don't care about, they're like, I just trust you, whatever you did, I'm sure it was right. Thank you. I usually just put that in the appendix at the back and I say, hey, here's how I did it in case you're curious. Sometimes I even follow it up with an email ahead of time and say, hey, this is what I did to collect this. We're going to talk about it more at the presentation, but not something I very strategically put in front of everything. I actually don't really have a very strong template that I use for everything. I find that every presentation is best to be tailored, which is probably something that can get really frustrated working for me, is because I just think there's so much power in making sure that things are memorable and different. And so keeping the format shifting and changing keeps people more engaged when you're presenting the same individuals. Hopefully that helps.
Wonderful. Yeah, thank you so much. Love the perspective. And it's been very exciting. Your background as well, where this is typically an audience of designers getting all these very broad perspectives and these very supportive fields and very closely related disciplines. Really excited getting your perspective as well.
Cool.
Another follow-up I have kind of on your work collaborating with designers and partnering with other team members. Is there any advice you might have for a designer looking at this who is working with a large data set, creating some of those visual presentations, be it infographics or dashboards or anything like that? Obviously every case is different, but what are maybe some key lessons you've found on being a better visualizer when creating these design presentations?
Yeah. Oh my gosh, there's so many lessons. The first one, and should I stop sharing? I don't even know if I'm still sharing. Um, Honestly, let me stop so I can see everyone if people come up. Honestly, the first thing is question everything. So if you've created this beautiful visual and you think it's perfect, try it in a different format. Try it a little different. Try it looking at it through a different perspective. It's crazy the amount of times I create something once and then I'm like, I'm going to sleep on that. And I come back the next day to a fresh slate and I'm like, I'm just going to redo it as if I never did the first one. And the second one's always better. And then you just go with that one because they feel like you learned so much the first time around and then you do it the second time. So that's annoying. And I know people don't always have time I don't always have time for it. So I don't always do it. But when I find that I have time to do something again and see if I can make it better, it definitely makes a difference. The second thing is going to be ask other people for feedback. What looks good to you might not look good to someone else, especially being mindful of inclusivity. I wear glasses, but I can pretty much see everything. And so color differentiates don't really make a difference to me. I can tell if something's lighter or darker. I can read white on really light backgrounds. Not everyone can. And so ensuring that everyone can actually see the visualization you've pulled together, I think is so important and something that is taken for granted. And I think people forget about. And so I often will then, if I don't have someone ask things, I'll move things to different screens. So I'll look at something on my phone, or I'll look at something on a smaller laptop, or I'll look at something on a bigger stretch screen, just to make sure the impact that I'm trying to present is there, no matter how the end user is potentially viewing it.
Fantastic. Love that idea of accessibility testing, not only our work and our output and our deliverables, but even how we're presenting them and how we're communicating them. Yeah, really great feedback. Cal, I'll hand it over to you.
Yeah, just something I've been wondering throughout your presentation is if you ever feel like you're trying to make a suggestion that, you've done UX research, maybe it's Nielsen Norman or the Baymard Institute or like benchmarking competitors, but it's not necessarily quantitative data. Do you ever feel like you're sort of trying to suggest things and it's not enough, or people are getting off track, and like how you could potentially reel them back into that storytelling? I'd love to just hear your thoughts.
Yeah, it happens. Sometimes I think the first thing I'm going to say, it's sometimes just out of our control. Sometimes there's just something happening in the organization. Sometimes there's things happening in the person's personal life that they just don't have time, they don't have space, they don't have energy. And you could offer them $1 million if they listened and made changes and they still wouldn't. I mean, maybe not, but you know what I'm saying, that like there's just so many other things that potentially are going on that it is nothing to do with you, the presentation, the data. They're just not, it's not the right time and it's not the right space to make that change. And that is something that I just have to throw up my hands and say, not today. We'll try it again another day. If there's potential where I feel as though all the data I could collect might potentially still not be strong enough, for lack of a better word, right? It's not conclusive enough. There's potentially some holes in it. Those are really tough situations because you might know in your heart and in your gut that this is the right way to go. And the data is just, there's just certain missing points of it. That's a situation where I find honesty is kind of the best way to do it, where you say, hey, here's the data I have to present, and lay out those gaps, lay out those missing pieces, because then they'll know that you are aware of it and you're not trying to hide anything. You're not trying to sweep anything under the rug. You are being very clear and transparent about this is a problem. Here's how I believe we can get solved. Here is my initial research into why I believe that's a problem. And then try to find ways to supplement it, right? So even things like personal testimony can be really impactful. So having people just write a short thing of, hey, I second that. Not so much that, but any kind of qualitative feedback that someone can give on that new process. You can say, hey, I interviewed 10 people across the org, and 9 of them find this to be the most challenging part of their job. Or I chatted with, 5 people at a focus group or at a roundtable, and here's the other potential solutions, which potentially could be more expensive or more time consuming, right? So any kind of things you can put together that are maybe a little less conventional to what you would typically choose on true qualitative, quantitative data, I think can be really helpful. So that's what I got. Hopefully that helps. I see that those are great ideas. So good. I'm glad they're helpful.
Wonderful. Thank you so much.
Yeah, great.
I'll open the floor up as well. Anybody else with any other thoughts or questions? And Jose, thank you again.
Happy to
Awesome.
be here.
Great. Well, thank you so much for your time tonight, Angelika. This has been wonderful. Again, really love having the additional perspectives. Jerry, I just saw you popped on your camera. Thanks for joining us. Another additional outside perspective. Great to see you back from a previous speaker earlier this year. Anything you'd like to add in?
No, just enjoyed the talk.
Awesome. Well, thanks for jumping on to say hi with the video at the end there. All right. Thank you so much, everybody. Please have a wonderful night. We do not have the exact date for next month's talk. Working on finalizing that right now with the speaker. But as Cal mentioned earlier, we will get that posted out on the socials and the Slack channel as quickly as we can.
Awesome.
Thank you so much, everybody. Have a wonderful evening.
Bye, everyone.
You have a great night. All right, bye.